All right, so this is demo number 1 for project number 2, the perspective project, linear perspective. The first thing you need to do for this project is to find a place that you want to draw. So it needs to be a place, ideally an architectural place that has a lot of parallel lines. So if you're on campus, I really like the hallways of HSC or the lobby of HSC. It can provide a really interesting challenge. If you're in your dorm rooms, you can just find an area, that has windows and seats. But you want to make sure that everything, you don't want to put anything at a diagonal. You want everything to be either perpendicular or parallel to each other. So I chose the breakfast nook in our house. This is a really awful picture. I tried to print it black and white, but for some reason my printer was doing weird things and I didn't want to take the time to figure it out, because the reality is it's monochrome. I can work with it. So, but if you'll notice about this space, we've got a table, but it's a pretty rectangular table and it is flush against the wall, so it is perpendicular to the wall. We've got some benches. There's some windows here. There's a little record player stand and we've got coffee stuff on top. And everything is either parallel or perpendicular to each other, which makes this a really good place to draw for this project. The next thing you're going to want to do after you find your place is choose whether you want to do 1-point or 2-point perspective. So 1-point perspective means you're facing the wall. So if I were to do 1-point perspective, I probably would have sat over here. And faced this wall. But I chose to do 2-point perspective just as a demo for those of you who want a challenge. So 2-point perspective means you're going to sit more at an angle to everything. Now remember, you sitting at an angle does not necessarily mean all these things are at an angle. You still want all the objects to be parallel and perpendicular. You're just the one who's shifting things up and sitting at an angle. And then what I want you to do is just pick the place and try to sketch it. So I picked my angle, I picked my perspective. You'll notice I drew a few perspective lines in there, so this was kind of my guesstimate about where my eye level and horizon line is. And you can kind of see me doing this, but I didn't like draw out the vanishing points or do anything like that. I was just mostly eyeballing this and trying to draw the place in my sketchbook to the best of my ability. I wasn't worried about details. I just kind of wanted to try it out just to see how does this look if I am looking at this in reality without worrying about perspective. Then you're going to want to take a picture of it. Now keep in mind that you're going to want to do as much of this drawing in real life as possible, so at the location. So again, maybe pick a location where you can go back there and draw consistently there. Because photos are always different, but they help. Photos give us something to kind of work with. So for this photo, I backed up a little bit, but I also made sure I was sitting down, because when I draw this, I'm going to sit down on a chair. I'm not drawing this standing up. So I want to make sure my photo is from that same perspective, the same angle, same perspective. And in this photo, I included a little bit more than in my drawing. And then what I did is I went in and I cropped it to how I want it to be. When we're drawing, especially perspective, it can be really easy to start turning our heads and noticing stuff that keeps going off onto either side and kind of just expand our perspective. And that's one way to make a perspective drawing feel distorted. So make sure you're always looking at the same angle. Kind of pick your main point and always point your head there. And if you move your head too much, that changes your perspective a little bit. So when you photograph, when you look, always do it from the same point of view in the same direction. And then I do find it, because most cameras expand a little bit more than the eye actually includes. So that's why I think it's really helpful to actually crop, okay, what do you want to include in your drawing? Okay, so once you have your sketch and your photo, you want to start establishing your perspective on your final drawing paper. So a couple of things to note here. I am using half a sheet of drawing paper, and I've actually trimmed off a couple inches up here. You can choose to draw on the big drawing paper and then trim down to your actual drawing, or you can draw on about half a sheet of paper. Don't go too much smaller than half a sheet of paper because you want to have space to work out some of the details, but also don't feel like you have to fill an entire big sheet of paper. Pay attention to whether you're working portrait orientation or landscape orientation. So initially when I sat down and looked at the place I was looking at, I thought I would be doing landscape orientation because in my mind this is kind of longer. But when I went to like sketch it out and take a picture, I realized I'm actually working portrait orientation, and that's going to be just fine. So I've got my paper. I've also got behind it some newsprint. Now you can use other sheets of drawing paper or newspaper. These are actually less to protect the drawing surface and more because when I do 2-point perspective, so this doesn't matter if you're doing 1-point perspective, you can ignore that, but when I do 2-point perspective, more than likely my vanishing points are going to be outside of my piece of paper. They're outside of this cropped perspective. And so I want a space where I can draw them and actually draw my lines out to the vanishing points and have those there and not just imagine them. The worst thing you can possibly do is just kind of pretend where the vanishing points are and make it up. It will be very obvious on your drawing. You will get part of your grade marked down. I will talk to you about it. So find some sheets of paper that will give you enough space to establish your vanishing points. So I've got this, I've got my sketch and my photograph. So the first thing I need to do is put my horizon line in. So just a reminder, your horizon line is the line where your eyes are at. It's eye level, you're looking straight forward, and it's kind of that where your eyes hit. Now, I sort of played with it in the sketch. I also can look at my photograph and I can see that I can just barely see the top of the coffee machine. So that means my horizon line is probably right around there. So in my photograph and in my sketch, it's right around halfway through. So I'm just gonna literally draw that line. And remember, I'm gonna draw out all the way. So I'm going to kind of make sure that it's horizontal, that I'm not drawing a crooked horizon line. So I'm actually going to, in order to make that happen, I'm going to measure. I'm going to do my horizon line just above halfway. Just above halfway. And then we're going to connect those dots. I could use my bigger ruler, but it has a tendency to run into things. And since I've got tripod set up, so I'm going to move my sketch and photographs for now. I'm going to place them in a spot where I can see them, but you may not be able to see them. I'm going to draw my horizon line out. Oops, there we go. Okay. So horizon line, check. Now, if you'll notice, I'm drawing pretty lightly because there's gonna be a lot of erasing and redrawing going on. That's just a natural part of the process. Okay, so once you have your horizon line, the next thing you need to do is draw basically the thing that's going to be your first line, your first perspective line. If you are doing, ideally it's something that spans across the horizon line too. So if you're doing 2-point perspective and you're inside, it's gonna be this corner line. That's gonna be the first thing you draw. If you're doing 1-point perspective, pick a square that's, so like if I was looking at this from one point perspective, I'd draw this window because it goes above and below my horizon line. And that would be the thing that I'm gonna draw first. So I'm gonna draw this line first, and I'm just gonna kind of, so I wanna take a look. Now again, I'm working from my photo and my sketch, but I'm also looking at the thing in reality, and I'm holding up my ruler to it. So if I was holding up my ruler to it, like I wanna figure out how far across. Is this line exactly halfway across? I think it's a little bit over here. Way. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to go straight up and down just a little bit to the left of halfway, and I'm just going to draw this whole line. And then what I need to figure out is, where does it end? So I've got like a couple inches up here, and I've got, it comes up quite a bit. I can't even see it where it ends. But I need to know where it ends because that's going to help me establish some perspective. So I'm going to do up here, and then if I need to adjust it later on, again. So this is just a matter of, to really figure it out, you can kind of look at your photograph, but you can also hold up your pen or pencil and do the measuring thing. So if I hold it up and I look, and like my entire, from top to bottom is my whole pencil, and then from this to this is this much of my pencil, I kind of look at the proportions there. So I'm just looking at the proportions of like how big are things compared to each other. So I've got that. And then from there, I can work on establishing my vanishing points. And I am going to use this ceiling angle to do that. If I could choose like the top of my windows, or top and bottom of my windows. But this is where, if you have a protractor, it can actually be really helpful, because you hold it up against here and you figure out what is the angle. So I don't have a protractor, but if you don't have a protractor, one of the things that I find is helpful is holding up a straight edge and holding it up horizontal. So if I put this perfectly horizontal, what I can figure out is that this angle right here is less angled, and this angle is more angled. So this is about 15 degrees, this is about 30 degrees. 30, 60, 90, 90, 45, and then kind of 15. Right? So if you can imagine, like, here's the protractor, here's the different angles. So this would be 60, 30. Yeah, so it's a little bit under 30. This would be 45, 25. So this one's maybe closer to like 25, and this one's closer to 15. So I'm gonna draw this longer angle first. And so here's my end point where it ends. And if I know, like, I'm gonna draw that imaginary horizontal line because that'll help me, give me something. So against that, it's like 15 degrees. So it's that shallow angle. And I notice it barely comes over here, so I can kind of like, I can use the edge of my paper too. I'm gonna do it from the top, there we go. Draw that line. Okay, so now I have that line, it's the right angle. So if it's the right angle, all I have to do is extend that line. And I don't know if you can see, but it actually vanishes outside of this piece of paper. So I'm gonna kind of, for the sake of this project, I'm gonna make this vanishing point right at the end of this paper. And you'll notice I always draw all the way through my vanishing points to make sure. Okay, so I don't think that's gonna mess with the perspective too much, and it's gonna make it a lot easier that I have the vanishing point here. Ideally, you add some paper and you make the vanishing point in the right place. But there's going to be a little bit of give and take and play as you figure out where your vanishing points are. So now I'm going to do the same thing with this line. I've got one point. I know the angle. So here's where geometry really comes into play. So I'm going to do, and I can also see kind of where it ends up here, again, where those proportions are. So I'm going to make it, and I want to make sure that it's a more steep angle. So I've got that line, and then again, I just continue down. Continue down. Continue down, and there's that vanishing point. Okay, so now I have two vanishing points. I have a horizon line, and you're just sort of extrapolating everything out from there. So if I have this vanishing point, now it can be a little tricky as you're doing this to remember which lines are real and which lines are imaginary. This horizontal line I drew, that was imaginary. These lines are imaginary. This is the ceiling line that I actually care about. So I'm just gonna like semi-erase them for now. And again, this is where drawing lightly really helps. So this part of the floor, it doesn't go this way. So I'm connecting from here, it goes out. So you remember kind of 2-point perspective kind of comes in at both ways. So I know that from here to here, I'm gonna draw that line and then just keep extending it. So that looks about right. Yeah, it doesn't go all the way to the bottom of the paper, and that's my floor. I don't actually ever see that line, but it's going to be helpful. I do, however, see this line over here, so I want to make sure I draw that one. So I'm connecting the two dots, the vanishing point, and where I know the wall meets the floor, and then I draw that out. And again, every time I draw a line, so this line is the line right here where the wall meets the floor. I want to double check, like, does that look like it's about in the right place at about the right angle from what I am seeing? And I'm going to say yeah. So again, these are imaginary lines. And to get started, this is a good place to kind of land for week 1. So I've got my horizon line. I've got, so I don't know if you can see it, but this right here is this wall, and this right here is this wall. So I have 2 walls, and I have my vanishing points established. You did it. Hooray.